So continuing our season talking with MHKs on their second full year in office, and a pretty exciting time for you, Dr. Alex Allinson. But I mean, you've had all that, the abortion thing, which is by far, I'm guessing, one of the biggest challenges to get that one through and sorted. Yep. We talked last year at the start of it. Did you ever get any difficulties with people taking out on you? I mean, and you know, did it ever get personal? Did it ever get really nasty at all?
Yes, it got personal to a small degree. Did it get really nasty to me? Not particularly, because I'm fairly thick-skinned, but I did have to have a chat with my kids and my wife about answering the phone call, answering letters, things like that. I mean, the reality is, whatever people think of politicians, if you do stick your neck out, there'll always be some people there willing to attack you. And that's fine, because we live in a democracy. And also, abortion is a very emotive subject, and some people take it extremely passionately on both sides. So I was prepared for that. All of us are going into Tynwald. We're not there just for the easy decisions. We're there to make some of the hard decisions, and we need to cope with the flack that comes from that.
And were you shocked with some of that flack? I mean, I'm talking about those graphic pictures that were put up around town.
I was hoping we wouldn't get that on the island. I was more than aware of the way protests were handled in the United States and the UK, but didn't really expect that to come at that stage. I expected it to come perhaps a little bit later. But that's the reality for you. And we live in an age whereby politicians are attacked, sometimes physically. I mean, we haven't seen that on the island, but I know that Eddie Tier was threatened.
Yes.
Previously. We've seen quite violent attacks against politicians doing a day-to-day, politician surgery. Sometimes they've been, shot in one case, knifed in others. We live in that sort of climate, but we still have to be very open, very accessible on the island. I don't know anywhere else where you can phone somebody up in the middle of the night on their mobile phone and get hold of your MP. Yeah. We do that in the Isle of Man, and the vast majority, 99.9% of people on this island respect that. But there's always one or two people who perhaps push the boundaries a little bit, and that's part of the job for me.
And the world is moving in quite fast in this whole direction. It's almost like we end up playing catch-up, I suppose, to some degree. But anyway, that's done.
It's done. And if I could just say that actually the positive feedback I got was far greater than any negative feedback. People phoning me up with their own experiences, people stopping me in the street, saying thank you was really humbling. Because from my point of view, I'm here as an MHK to do a job, and this is the job I said I'd do from the outset.
Would you say that's your biggest achievement this year, as far as political bills?
I'll be happy when it's all done.
Yes, because it's still hanging.
And again, you could call it naivety. It's taken much longer than I expected. The process of consultation and getting consensus behind it's been really, really important. It's taken a bit of a long time, which comes on to your next question you haven't asked yet, which is the role of government. And I suppose one of the things that's I've become more aware of over this year is the time it sometimes takes once you've made a decision to actually see the results of it, to get it into action, to make a difference to people's lives. It's all very well to talk about it and vote about it, but I think what myself and all of my colleagues want is for people on the street to see the benefits of decisions being made by this government.
Okay, and when will they see the actual benefit of this abortion? When it's finally, how, this year?
This year, I'm hoping we'll get royal assent, and then it's a matter of making sure that the Department of Health and Social Care puts the resources into getting the process up and running, so people know if they're pregnant and if they want counselling for a termination, who they go to, who they can trust to give them that information, to allow them to make that choice, and then to go on from there, whether they decide yes or no, whether they want to go ahead with that pregnancy. So yes, this year. And then we go on to other things, and it's a constant rolling platform of change in this government.
Modernisation, change. What other things would you say you've been successful with in the last year since we last did this?
Myself, we've done various things with Manx Utilities, which will come to fruition next month when we look at the 5-year pricing structure. We've been doing things in terms of the Department of Home Affairs with a very extensive sexual offences bill, which will go out to consultation later this year. So there's a huge amount of work being done in the background. Again, people want results. They want to see a difference. And I think we will see more of that over the next 12 months. But a lot of the things we've been doing this year have been consolidating the first year, looking forward to the third. But there have been some really good things happening, which I think people forget. The whole idea of a minimum wage going up, number one. Two, being made across the board for younger people to stop this arbitrary decrease in your wages according to how young you are is a really positive step. Looking back at last year's budget with some of the changes that came into place with increased benefits for people, looking at the much lower number of people who are unemployed and the much higher number of people who are going into training, going into apprenticeships, going into the unmanned college. I think there's a lot of good news there, and I'm hoping that with some of the redevelopment that's happening around particularly the Douglas area, that we can get a really positive vibe to this country. My role, first and foremost, I suppose, is a constituency, MHK, representing the people of Ramsey. I want to see a little bit of that vibe going to places like Ramsey, to Peel, to Carstown, to Port St Erin, to those other places on the island, to make sure that everyone gets the benefit.
What was your breakdown? Did you answer that question from Pag about how much?
Yeah. I said 20% constituency work, but I live there. So actually, even when I'm sleeping, I'm there. I passionately believe that politicians can't take their although we eye a greater prize, we eye big bills and big headlines. At the end of the day, we're there to be phoned up, later on a Sunday afternoon because somebody's heating's gone off, or because they've got flooded, or because people want to know whether they're going to be evicted or not and who they turn to for help. So we have to retain that very local presence, local knowledge and local influence, while acting sometimes on a global scale. So I'm dealing with drains in a small street in Ramsey, and then talking about Brexit the next day, or sanctions against North Korea. And it's that part of the job which is fascinating.
How much does MUA take up? I mean, that's a big chunk, isn't it?
It is. It's a big job. I was very, very privileged to be asked to be the chair. It is a big job because it encompasses three major utilities. It's dealing with what we've got at the moment, improving it in terms of the sewage treatment works that we'll be doing for Peel and Laxey. It's dealing with some of the, as we said, the real hard deliverables. How much is it going to cost me next year? What are the electricity prices going to be like?
I'm going to ask you that because
are we going to go for electric vehicles? How are we going to deal with climate change? How are we going to deal with all these things?
Please answer any of those, because they're all valid questions.
They are, and so in terms of the time, we've spent a huge amount of time looking at the growth of electric vehicles, dealing with things across government to make sure we lead by example. So we have more charging units so people can use their cars and don't get anxious about them running out. But also we look at the government fleet. So let's lead by example. Let's have more government cars that are electric.
Well, I'm going green any minute now, so I'll be feeding back to you information, because it is, range anxiety, which shouldn't exist in that amount. But anyway, that's probably another interview. But charging points, I think the promenade is going to have quite a few. And that's
the promenade is. We're looking at some of the car parks to bring more in there, particularly for people who live in flats who can't just run an extension cable down 3 stories. How we deal with these sort of things, because we're looking at a long-term future in terms of climate change and decreasing pollution, but also actually giving the Isle of Man a bit of a cutting edge.
And the MUA do have a special rate for cars at 4p. I'll be investigating that one as well. But you said about the 5-year price structure for MUA. You're about to announce then, are you?
We had a Tynwald resolution October last year to come back with a long-term pricing structure for
fix things for 5.
Well, I didn't say fix. You said fix. We're looking at sewage, water, electricity over the next 3 to 5 years. How we can use the £95 million that Treasury gave us on behalf of the taxpayer to reduce our debts, which is still considerable, how we can use that to make a fairer system for people of this island. So that's what I'll be coming to Tynwald with in October, and that's a big amount of work to get it right, not only so it's fair, but also so it pays off the debt in 2035.
Do you think it should be under a ministry rather than a chairmanship? I mean, is it that sort of job that it is? It sounds like it really is its own.
It's a huge responsibility, a huge honour to be doing this. Huge number of zeros at the end of every figure. I and the board report to Ray Harmer in Department for the
Department for Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Sorry, I'm getting my departments mixed up. I do apologise. Department for Infrastructure, so that they're our sponsoring body in the same way as the Post Office report as well. And so we have a board. We have some really interesting people there, like Bill Mummery. we have Chris Allen from Chamber of Commerce, all feeding in their expertise to the board, so we can try to get the sums right, but also provide a really good first-class service to the people of the island.
Now, last year you were still doing GP on Mondays and Fridays, and we were talking at the time that you thought that maybe that isn't going to continue, and it didn't.
Yep.
Was that a tough one for you to give that up, or was it just inevitable?
It was probably the most difficult decision I've had to make personally, but once I was offered a role in the Cabinet Office, which again is a huge honour but also a huge responsibility because it goes right across government.
What does that mean?
What does Cabinet Office do? Everything under the surface that nobody else will, and everything that people take for granted. What is the Isle of Man passport going to be like after Brexit? What colour is it going to be? Where is it going to be printed?
So,
what are the immigration rules going to be
all
like?
These silos, and I hope that term, but it's meant to meet at the top there, is that what you're saying?
It is, and actually the Cabinet Office is about getting rid of silos. The Cabinet Office is about coordinating government.
People talking to each other, like
that? People talking to each other, people going out to each other and trying to do the right thing, linking things together. So for instance, when we have all the discussion about how many tourists come over, how much they spend, that comes from the Cabinet Office. When we talk about international development and money given by the Isle of Man government and where's the best place to spend it, that comes down to the Cabinet Office. So it's really intrinsic with the workings government across a whole range of areas, and fascinating place to work.
But losing that contact with your patients must be, as I say, quite a blow, I suppose, because
it's emotionally quite a blow, because I've put a lot of my time and effort and passion into trying to be as good a doctor as I can. Now I'm trying to put that same amount into being as good a constituency politician.
And where are you going? I mean, a ministership, or if that's the right word, ministership, will come up at some point, and your name comes up in the journalistic chitter that you would be obviously someone that would fit at some point. You're still interested in taking that on, yeah?
There are no vacancies at the moment, but yes, if somebody thought I was up to the challenge, I'll take on any role going.
And can I pin you down which one you'd like? If you had a choice?
Again, there are no vacancies. What would I like? I'm really enjoying actually being a backbencher with responsibilities in the Department of Home Affairs, Manx Utilities, and the Cabinet Office. And part of that is because every now and again you get really interesting overlap. You get the police interested in electric cars, or you get something like that, and it's that ability to bridge different areas and different silos or departments and bring them together I find fascinating. The same with people. You meet people at a particular meeting who've got a point of view. You then say, well, actually, that's really interesting. Why don't you come and talk to somebody else I've just met who has got exactly the same point of view, put them together, and it's that networking across government which is really interesting. So I haven't answered your question. To genuinely, if a vacancy comes up and if the Chief Minister feels I'm up to it, the answer would be yes.
But anything but health, I think that you said last time around.
Health would be difficult. There isn't a vacancy in health because David Ashford's doing an incredibly good job there. Health, I think, me going into it, particularly when I was working as GP, I would always be seen as having a vested interest. And I probably would have, even if it was subliminal. I'd always have a bias from one point of view to another. So whilst I'm very interested in being involved in health, I still take on a lot of constituents who work about health. I've been feeding into the current consultation, looking at the future funding of the health service and done some interviews with them. Yes, you've got a very, very good person doing the job already.
What have you got lined up this year? What things are you determined from your manifesto, or not even? You know, what things would you like to see between this interview and the next one to happen?
I'd like to see, again, coming back to the people who voted me into this job, I'd like to see some more development in Ramsey. I'd like to see government taking on perhaps a more proactive view of getting some of the government offices out of the Douglas area. I'd like to see the plans for a marina being developed in Ramsey.
So going
expanded.
For that one, yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Seems like an obvious, but I mean
it does. But again, it's finance and it's getting the right plan that takes on board everyone and everyone's really behind it. I'd like to see more jobs in the north because when we looked at the recent unemployment figures, we have relatively more unemployed in the north, but less vacancies. And so people having to commute backwards and forwards. I'd like to try to correct that imbalance in the north. We've got a whole range of things coming on board over the next 12 months in terms of government. We've got Brexit and the way we deal with that, the way we look after our local economy, which I think is really important, the way we grow our local economy. But so there's the bread and butter stuff. There's making sure that the system still works. And then there's the stuff beyond that. So we're talking about things like drug reform and medicinal cannabis, which was in my manifesto, and I think which over the last year has become even more topical.
Just tell me, and I was chatting to the Chief Constable actually, really, you can't change the drugs laws without bringing a customs agreement right between here and the UK, because if you legalise cannabis here, someone could get on the boat, or and it causes all sorts of headache. And as the Chief said, we are under the UK's system, and that will be it until we get your
that'll be it until we change it.
The UK is going to change it, and then we just follow suit, right?
No. I think we should lead by example. I completely understand the Chief Constable's reticence, and I completely understand that any laws we bring, and we have to be incredibly careful about the unintended consequences. Nobody wants to be strip searched every time they go for a day trip to Liverpool because they're coming from the Isle of Man. You need to be really, really careful the way you organised it. But I believe that we can organise a better system of dealing with drugs on this island rather than purely criminalising them.
Just remind me, what drugs are you going, like some countries have just given up all sorts of, any sort of
some
Class A?
Some countries have given up. Some countries have had a very, very pragmatic response to national crises. So Portugal, for instance, got rid of decriminalised all of their drugs, going up to heroin. I'm not advocating that. I don't think there's anyone in the Isle of Man who particularly would do. But what I'm saying is that those people who get into trouble by using drugs, we need to treat it in the right way. We need to get away from purely dealing with them as criminals and deal with them in terms of their health problems and their social problems, and helping them get off those drugs and rehabilitate them to society, rather than to just lock them up in jail.
And you do see that potential here, that
yes,
can be done?
Okay. I think there's been, over the last year, huge change in terms of the medicinal use of cannabis. You know, if this time last year I told you that the Home Secretary had allowed a child to have medicinal cannabis, you'd have laughed at me. You said, don't be stupid. Yeah. That's happened because in certain forms of childhood epilepsy, it's been shown to be helpful. Now, there's a lot of science we need to get to develop behind that, but that's happening.
It's going to be interesting to see how this develops.
It is.
Time to ask you about your performance, I think.
Yeah.
And we have just had a quick chat before we started, just reminding ourselves last year, I think... 7 was last year's. Safe 7.
Safe 7. I will be happy when we've got some decent outcomes. As I said, the economic situation around Ramsey needs improving. The economic situation outside Douglas needs to be improved. I think this last year has shown a huge amount of progress. We haven't even talked about the steam packet and what will develop over the next 12 months with that. Huge amount of progress. But for my own personal performance, yes, I've done my best. I'll give myself a B. Safe 7.
7.5?
No, you said no half points last time.
I think we've broken that already this year.
When I get some definite outcomes, when I can say to people, hand on heart, right, this is what I've done, this is down to me, then I'll give myself an 8 next year. Okay,
and while you're still outside Coman, what are you going to give government? And
I give them an 8, 8.5.
8.5? Okay.
Yeah,
more than last year then.
Yeah, I think what the government have shown over this last year is making some quite bold decisions in terms of, as we talked about, minimum wage and changing that in terms of purchasing the steam packet and really securing that deal for the future, in terms of the announcements last week about the new dock
in Liverpool.
Yeah, I am. It's a lot of money, but when you look at that money over 20, 30 year period, and when you look at the security it will bring to the Isle of Man, when you look at the fact that we can guarantee our transport links by sea, we can actually do the best deal we can for the people of the Isle of Man and encourage more tourism here, but also encourage more trade backwards and forwards. I think that's all a good thing.
Are you enjoying yourself? I think that
absolutely loving it. Yeah. I felt embarrassed to say that to begin with, but you know, time flies when you're enjoying yourself, and it seems like only a few weeks ago that we were having this conversation. Yeah. Again, that's one of the dangers, that the time does fly very, very quickly. And so what we need to do is really make sure that some of the promises that I and all of us made in our manifestos 2 years ago are actually made, we deliver on in the next year or two. Because before we know it, you'll be asking me, well, how was your final year?
Yeah.
And lots of things change, but you can't take your eye off the prize, which is representing the people who voted you in and doing as good best job that you can.